All right, to go ahead and begin this next step, what we're going to be doing is, again, working with our DEM. So we've got our hillshade constructed, right? We can go ahead and set this to the background for now. Let's go ahead and pull up our DEM, right? And so we're, again, continue to stay focused in on using this information, this digital elevation model, to help us understand what's going on. So hillshade allows us to go ahead and visualize the topography of a particular site. The next tool I'm going to show you how to use is actually slope. And so in our natural progression here, that we really, we just left off of kind of talking about how we move through with DEMs of varying quality, right? You go ahead and bring in a hillshade. The better the DEM is, the less pixelation you get in your hillshade. We've talked about aspect as being something you can calculate to help you with vegetation analysis. And then we arrive at slope. What you see presented here is really something that I refer to as stoplight analysis. And stoplight analysis can be really incredibly useful for us as we try and just understand a site. It's basically going ahead and breaking down slope into, slight slope or relatively flat, a relatively flat, a slight slope, and then an extreme slope, right? We can play with the number classifications, but the basic ideas stay the same. So this is what we want to do when we go ahead and jump in and look at Happy Hollow Park. We have our DEM. We're going to use the slope tool. And again, for simplicity's sake, what I'm going to go ahead and do, make sure I don't grab the hillshade. I want the DEM, not the hillshade layer. All right, hillshade doesn't actually continue to contain this, so if you were to run it, it's going to actually throw an error at you, and you won't be able to process that information. So I'm going to go ahead and pause it here. Actually, no, that jumped in pretty quickly. And so I'm going to say Happy Hollow Park instructor. And I'm going to just call that out as slope. And hit save. All right, and so I've given it a name. Now I could go in here and I could go ahead and start changing out my output measurement. So I can go from degree to percent rise. I can change out what method I'm using. It's telling me that for right now it does not like these longer names. So let's just go ahead and change that up to iSlope, which will keep it within my organized within that layer. Hopefully that's small enough it'll actually let me run it. And so the same basic rules apply. You could go ahead and change your output measurement. You could change the method. And so what it means by method is it can actually calculate out in a couple of different ways, and it just changes the math slightly. It's all explained here, but in general, what I'm trying to teach you at this stage of your GIS knowledge is to go ahead and just allow the defaults to guide this. You put the slope in, or you put your DEM in as your input raster, you tell it where you want it to save, and then I want you to be able to basically come down and hit OK. What happens when I hit OK is it's going to go ahead and process this. And what ideally is going to come out of this on the other side is that I'm going to get an assessment of where are the steep slopes, where are the medium slopes, and where are the relatively flat or very small sloped areas within our study area. So this went ahead and wrapped up relatively quickly as I expected. But again, I'm going to always work clean, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off the DEM that's hiding behind it. And real quick, I'm just going to go ahead and use this to zoom in on this space. And you're going to see that here in Happy Hollow Park, it goes ahead and starts to break all of this information apart into effectively stoplight analysis, high, medium, and low. You could go ahead and stop at this point in time and use this information, use this layer just as it's reported. This would be enough to go ahead and change this up. The challenge being that when you want to go ahead and put a legend together for this is that you'll see I've already inserted a legend in this space. And the problem is that it wants to report out all of those different layers of information, right? And so let me go ahead and zoom in on that legend just to show you what's going on down here. And so again, within the legend, you see all this different information. I can certainly make that larger so that text is actually more readable. There we go. I can make it a little bit larger, but again, we run into this same basic issue. What is it I'm really trying to report? So one thing you can always do in GIS to simplify your legend is that you can actually come in and you click on the graphic. So again, it's kind of like working in PowerPoint. Click on it, you right click, convert it over to a graphic. And then what I'm going to do is because now it's a graphic, I'm going to ungroup it. And in the process of ungrouping it, Now I can come in and actually delete out all of these extra features that I just don't really want to include in my legend. And I'll be honest with you, I can go a step further than that and actually go into over here and I could change up the names by just clicking on it. It'll pop it up and I could type in a new name if I wanted. I'm going to kick this out to Photoshop anyway, and so I'm just not going to worry about it. In this case, I'm just going to grab my stoplight and I'm going to bring it all together. And then I will go ahead and, arrange that within my overall page layout to be able to go ahead and kick that out with this drawing. If you need a white background behind all of this, you do have to regroup it and then add a background to it. But anyway, there's a lot of different ways to bring that information in. Or I could just recreate red, yellow, and green in Photoshop and then label them as relatively flat, slight slope, and severe slope. Now, to put some actual numbers behind this, the other thing that I should just remind you of is that you have lots of different ability to control. I really kind of like the output that showed up here in this particular layout. It does give me a lot of information about the site at a relatively fine scale. Again, I can zoom in on that space and get a lot of different information. But if you wanted to change it, right? If you wanted to go ahead and actually just force it down to something that read as 3 categories, you can do that. What you're going to see is that a lot more areas pop out in red. And what's happening there is that behind the scenes, it's basically just grouping things differently. And so you can come in and set this. I can actually come in and drag this around if I want. And that will have an impact on this, right? And see, lots more area just fell into the yellow because of how I changed that classification. Most of the time what I do is allow the computer to kind of, in general, give me, the information the way, that makes most sense to me. And so you can change this up. You can select amongst several different options here, but it's really up to you. If you really wanted 32 classes of data, it'll give you 32 classes of data, and that's what it'll look like in the end, right? And so some of this is a graphic component. Some of this is helping to really understand the site. I generally default to somewhere between 3 and 5 classes at the very most, as that generally gets me the kind of information I want. Suddenly I probably need to add an orange box because of how much orange is showing here into my legend. But again, lots of different ways to do the same thing. I want you to get in and explore this. I want you to find a system that works for you. In terms of what these values represent, this is really trying to talk about from, very, very shallow 0-degree angled slopes all the way up to 90-degree angled slopes. I've gone ahead and explored what's going on in this particular data set. What I will tell you is I don't believe that there's 90-degree slopes anywhere in this data set. And the histogram would actually back me up on this, is that as I go ahead and look at this, what you're actually seeing is that the number of cells that actually fall into each one of these categories almost stops somewhere about here. I don't see any other cases, but I suspect that somewhere down here we have an error within our data set at 89.45 that is kicking in as there's a cell that has been miscoded, and that it's actually making this more challenging to interpret it. That happens. And so those are the things that we definitely just have to include in this, right? If we look at the overall mean score or mean within this, you can see that it is somewhere down here just north of 4.5 degrees. And so somewhere around 5 degrees is our average slope across the entire area. But certainly, and we can start to pan that out from there, looking at how many different standard deviations away from the mean. But long story short is, I think we got an error in our data set. I think that's part of what's driving this labeling. But you don't need to worry about it, because from a stoplight analysis standpoint, you've got it. It's all here. You just have to go ahead and put a legend that describes what you're seeing in front of it. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop this video, and we'll pick up in the next video, focusing in on how do we track stormwater flow across the site.